Welcome, Songtown. We've got a fun show today. Marty and I thought it would be great to give you a list, or at least a few of our favorite books that we've found over the years on songwriting. Although I have to say, Marty, some of my books are not necessarily on songwriting, but they've really inspired me as a songwriter to kind of feed my creativity. So I'm looking forward, and I hope that we haven't talked about this, so I'm hoping we both don't, like have the same books on our list.
Yes, we've not compared.
Yes. So you want to kick it off, Marty? Give us one of your favorites.
All right, so one of my favorite, and this is an older book that may even be out of print, but you can still find it. But it's called How to Make a Good Song a Hit Song. There's the cover. And it's by Molly Ann Lycan, who's a hit writer. But she's got lots. Basically, the book is on rewriting. So it's like how to take a song you've got that's good and rewrite it to make it more like a hit song. And I just found it really useful. It's something I picked up early in my career, and it's got a lot of great info. So, what about you?
I'm going to go out there right off the bat and pick a book. I'm going to edit the crap out of this video. What the hell? We'll just leave it in the blooper series. I'm going to go out on a limb here for my first book and choose something that's not about songwriting per se, but I just looked it up. It's number 4 on the creativity book chart in Amazon, and it's the book, The Artist's Way. And,
Ooh, classic.
yeah, like that book, it's now has its 30th year edition,
Oh
and
wow.
30 plus years. I think it came out in 1991, but it's by Julia Cameron. And when I started, everybody was talking about this book when I started my songwriting journey. And it was one of those books where, have you done The Artist's Way yet? And basically, it kind of, there's 2 things it has you do. You're going to write each morning what they call the morning pages. And it's really like writing 3 pages out by hand of just your thoughts, whatever comes, kind of free form writing. And it's really geared to unblock your creativity. And then the other principle was to make an artist date with yourself. So
Whoa.
if you're stuck in your creativity, once a week, you're supposed to go out and say, go to a museum or do something, take a walk in nature, whatever it is, do something that's going to feed your creativity. And I have to say, I did this book, religiously for a couple years. And I think it's really important when you start out as a writer to do something like this because it gets you in touch with that inner voice, and really, because that's all we have as writers that separate us from other writers. We can all learn to write a commercial song if you follow, and that's not going to make you a successful writer. You have to do the combination of learning to write well, learning the craft, but also writing from the heart, writing from your own voice. So I think
Yeah,
this book is
absolutely.
great. And, in our case, Marty, we've been doing this so long, it's probably a good idea for people like us to go back, and if we've kind of gotten away from that, our inner voice, and kind of rediscover it again. So I love the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, it's great. It's been a long time since I read it, but I need to go back to that again.
Yeah, I
Good.
mean, you might think it's a little woo woo, but I think we need that today. I think that there's so much like revolving around your phone and scrolling, through social media, and there seems like there's never enough quiet moments anymore.
Right.
And the quiet moments are what put us in touch with our inner creativity. And so I think a book like this is probably why it's doing so well now, is that it's really needed right now.
Yeah, we got more noise coming at us these days than ever before.
Oh
But
man.
But I was going to say, Clay, that segment was a little touchy feely for you. I mean, I was impressed that you went there. Uh, so my next book is one, and it's kind of a technical book, but it's called Chord Progressions for Songwriters. There's the title. And so it's by Richard J. Scott, and it's got some music theory and that kind of stuff in it a little bit, but it also takes you through tons and tons and tons of hit songs and shows you how they used different chord progressions. And for someone like me who's not a great guitar player, it really has opened up some things for me. So like if I feel like I'm stuck and kind of doing the same old thing, I can go to this book and find some different chord progressions to experiment with, and it kind of opens up my creativity because I tend to just write very, very similar kind of chord progression. So it's been a great, for me as a lyricist, it's been great, but I can only imagine if you're a great player that some of these ideas might really be awesome for you.
That's a thick book, and it's centered just
It
around chord
is.
progressions.
It is a very thick book. Yeah. Yeah. It's all about chord progressions. And it, like I said, it takes you through, it'll show you a song that uses that. So you can go, listen to that song, and then you can mess around with it on your own and kind of see how they use that progression and why it worked and that kind of stuff.
Excellent. So far, none of your books are on my list. This one might be on your list. I don't know. Stephen King's Own Writing. Is that on your list?
It is on my list, yes.
I love this book. Stephen King is not a well-known songwriter. No, he's not. He does, I believe, play in a band, but it's all about the work ethic and the dedication and the disappointment of an artist's life. And it doesn't matter if you're writing books, if you're writing songs, if you're a painter. It really opened my eyes, and if nothing else, to let me know that other people are going through what we go through, because starting out, I read where when he started out, he kept getting rejections and rejection slips, every time he'd send in a book. And he would work, 2 jobs and try to find time to write at night, when he wasn't working, and doing whatever he could. And I could relate. In my 20s, I totally had to work a day job, and then I would write songs all night. I don't think I ever slept. But a book like this was like, yes, I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And he really showed me in this book that, I thought, well, maybe I'm not as talented as everyone else, because I had to work damn hard to get to where I am. And then it was like Stephen King says, no, son, we all had to work hard to get where we are,
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of that book is he talks about being at a writing seminar early in his career. And he's like, after the third person got up and said, I just can't find the words to express whatever. He was like, I wanted to stand up and scream, maybe you shouldn't be a writer if you can't find the words to express anything. But yeah, that book is inspirational because it is about just writing, whatever kind of writing you might be doing. It applies to songwriting. It applies to script writing, book writing, anything you might be writing. It's got a lot of inspiration and great thoughts.
Isn't this the book where he says writer's block is the luxury of amateurs?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because in all honesty, when you and I show up to write, if you're showing up to write with a famous artist, or I'm showing up to write with a famous artist, or another songwriter, or a producer, if we show up and go, gosh, I got writer's block today, we're not going to get a call back next time. Yeah. So I think you really learn that it's almost like if you don't have a deadline, if you don't have that, reason to be writing today, it's easy to slip back. Oh, I've got writer's block. But if you're showing up to co-write, if you're showing up to work with an artist, you don't have time for that. And so I think a lot of times we got to get out of our heads. And Rory Burke, who's a Hall of Fame songwriter, told me that he goes, his take on it was, if you got writer's block, you're being too hard on yourself. You know, you're being a perfectionist.
Hmm.
And as writers, we don't have time to do that. Our job is to write, you know. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, just to get past, if you do have writer's block, just start writing and don't worry about it. Write whatever comes out. It's like a dirty water faucet. You turn on the faucet and dirty water comes out, but then after it
Hmm.
runs, it starts getting some clean water coming out. And
Yeah.
that's the way the flow is for writing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, my next one might be on your list as well. I may be stealing from you on this one too, but Toonsmith by Jimmy Webb is a
Oh,
great book.
you got me.
Awesome. Yeah. So to me, when I first read the book, I'm like, well, there's a lot of stories in here. I wish there was more like education. But then, yeah, I've actually went back and read it again, and I'm like, no, actually, it's really, really cool to hear. Just you're kind of getting into his mindset when he wrote some of those great songs, and hearing the backstory of what was going on and that kind of stuff is very cool. So I found it to be a inspirational book as well, and it really turned me on to his music, not just um, the music he wrote for other people, but if you like, I think his record is called 10 Easy Pieces.
Hmm.
That's him and a piano playing a lot of those big hits, and it's amazing. So that record was one of my favorites for a long time because I read that book.
Yeah, that book is kind of divided into two parts. The first half is a lot of stories, and there were some inspirational stories. I remember one passage where his first publishing deal, his publisher walked him into his new writing room. He gave him a room to write in and said, "In this room, there are no mistakes." And he said that phrase really changed the way he approached his writing. He's like, in my writing room, there are no mistakes. It's all big experiment. And that quote really had a profound effect on me.
Yeah.
Um, but I was going to say there's two parts of that book, because the back half of that book gets very technical into theory. And that's where most people that aren't into that kind of like, okay, well, it's a thick book. So
Yeah.
you're either reading the first half and you're into it, or you're reading the second half and you're into it. It's hard to read both halves if you're not a music theory buff.
Yeah, and I am, but it got a little technical for me in places, but it's still
Yeah.
a great book and recommended.
Yeah.
What's your
So
next one?
I think this is going to be the last one that's on my list. And it's, once again, it's not a book on songwriting. It's called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Have you read that book, Marty?
I have. I actually
Ah,
quote that book in my lyric writing class.
yeah. I mean, Anne Lamott is just a brilliant writer. And it's just so much about the process of getting you to unblock yourself and learn to write. It's a beautiful book. One of my favorite quotes is if you want to learn about living, study someone who's dying. And that was
Hmm.
just like, oh, because
Hmm.
they know how to live at that point, because
Yeah.
they don't have a lot of time. And and I read that when I was going through, a good friend of mine didn't have that long to live, and that book really encouraged me. I don't want to go off on like that tangent, but it's just a powerful book about life and about writing, and it I've never recommended it to anyone that hasn't really gotten something of value out of that book.
Yeah. That's a great book. But actually, what you said reminded me. One time on David Letterman's show, he had Warren Zevon on there just a
Yeah.
couple weeks before he died, and he said, "Well, let's get the elephant out of the room. What's it like?" And Warren Zevon said, "Man, you ought to taste a ham sandwich." And his
Oh,
his, his point was every little thing is awesome when you know you don't have much time left, And so that reminded me of what you said about that book.
man, that gave me chill bumps. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah,
like everything at that point, you just want to stop and enjoy the moment.
yeah, yeah.
So what's the last book on your list, man?
My last one is The Craft of Lyric Writing by Sheila Davis. It is a classic.
I'm in that book. Yes.
Very cool.
One of the later editions, she wrote me because was fortunate to take a class from her. I think I was about 19. And so she wrote me and she goes, can I put your song Beautiful Mess as an example of oxymorons in my book? So I thought that was so cool because she was a real inspiration to me.
Are you sure she didn't say you're an example of a moron in her book?
No.
Okay.
No.
But so as a lyricist, this book is like kind of the Bible for a lyricist, I think, and as far as just learning the craft. And I mean, I've got notes all in this book. I've got the whole front of it. It's got handwritten notes in it that I took and pages I want to go back and reference. So, if you get I think mine's an older version of it, there might be a few things that are outdated a little bit, but really solid book on just learning the craft of lyric writing.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up our show today. We want to thank Sweetwater, our sponsor for the podcast. They are amazing. You can see, if you're looking at this podcast on YouTube, I have a whole studio of gear behind me that came from Sweetwater over the last 15 years. Marty's got a bunch of gold records behind him that Sweetwater gear helped him do demos and things over the years. So not saying that Sweetwater will get you your first gold record, but hey, it can't hurt, can it?
It could. That's right.
It could.
Check out the show notes for links to our books. We have actually a book on co-writing that we think is the only one in existence on that topic.
By a pro songwriter, yeah.
Yeah. So it's called Mastering the Art of Co-Writing. Clay's got one on melody writing. I've got one on lyric writing. And we've also got links there to SongTown. Love for you to check us out. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you next Tuesday.